All right, so St. Paul says to the church, Jesus is our high priest. He says this very boldly, very clearly that Jesus is our high priest. And that would have had a lot of impact to those who were receiving this letter there in Judea, the Jerusalem area. And he states this at the end of chapter 4 of the book of Hebrews, and then he begins to develop it richly in chapter 5, and he refers to it often throughout the rest of the book of Hebrews. So, like I said, it's important for us to have at least a basic grasp of the office of the high priest of Israel and who he was, what he did, where it came from, what was the feel of it, how important was it to the Jewish people. It was very important. All right, so Jesus is the high priest of the new covenant. And in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14, and we touched on this real briefly last time, seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. So, Yahweh, the one true God, has established a new covenant and a new priesthood and a new high priest, a new high priest. Because the whole theme, it starts off in the book of Hebrews with what God has said. And God has now said new covenant. He said various things throughout history before the coming of Christ, but now he has said Jesus. He has now said that Jesus is the high priest. All right. So, an overview of the office of high priest in the Old Covenant. Now, I think this is really cool. I love history, though. This is a lot of history we're going to go through tonight, and I just can't get enough of that. So, I'm just going to do an overview of the office of high priest in the Old Covenant. All right. So, to start off our thinking tonight, we need to think about the revelation of God to man. Because I think a lot of people, they think about the Old Covenant, they think about the Old Testament, Moses, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, the Mosaic Law, Ten Commandments, and all that. And they sometimes think that that was kind of the first time that God spoke. And so that was super important. It was super important, but it wasn't the first time that God spoke on the earth. There was kind of a series of him speaking and covenants that he made and him addressing people throughout history. And then one of the last one before the new covenant was the Mosaic covenant, but the revelation of God to man. And the Mosaic law was given in around 1446 BC. And we can figure those dates out because of clues and information that we have in the Bible. It was about 1446 BC. That's when the Exodus was, and then they went down to Mount Sinai, and God downloaded from the cloud, which is an interesting way to think about it. But he's up in the cloud, Moses is, and then he comes down with the law and gives it to the people. So God basically downloaded the law to the people from the cloud a long time ago, before that was all kind of common ways of speaking. But prior to the establishment of the Mosaic Law, which took place in 1446 BC, God spoke to people. This wasn't the first time that he was speaking to people. He had done it before. And it's obvious when you look at it, right? Adam and Eve, I mean, God was speaking directly to them and to their sons. Abel was very close to God. God spoke to Noah. God spoke to Abraham. He also spoke to Sarah. He spoke to Isaac. He also spoke to Rebekah. He spoke to Jacob. He spoke to Joseph. That was Jacob's favorite son, Joseph. And it goes on and on and on. He's before the Mosaic covenant, before Moses, God did a lot of speaking to a lot of people. And these are just the ones we know of in the Bible. There might have been other ones as well that were going on. And we see in the Old Testament before the Mosaic Law that God spoke to men, and we see men building altars and worshiping the God who spoke to them. That's what we see with Abraham. God speaks to Abraham, and then we're told right out of the gate that what's he do? After he gets spoken to by God, he builds an altar to worship God. The first thing that Noah did when he got off the ark is to build an altar to worship God. And he would have been doing that before he got on the ark too, but he did it after he got on. He's like, man, I haven't been able to do this in a while. So he got off the ark and he did it. Plus, he was thanking God because he realized that he and his family, they were the only ones on the earth, human beings. So he was very grateful that God had saved them. And here's the whole point. People communed with God prior to the presence of the Mosaic Law. That was going on. This is something that God did. Kind of big picture, this is covenant theology, and this is what you see in Scripture. You have progressive covenants that God makes with people. The Adamic covenant, that was a covenant that was made with Adam and Eve. And in that covenant, if they stayed faithful and continued to grow in the likeness of God, then they would remain in Eden and they would begin the process of extending Eden throughout the world. And they would just have this intimacy with God. And they, like I said, they'd grow more and more like God. But of course, they sinned and fell out of that. And then God made a covenant with Noah, the Noahic covenant, and then the Abrahamic covenant, and then the Mosaic covenant. Within the, and I've got it moved over because really the Davidic covenant occurs within, under the umbrella of the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant. I'll talk more about these in a second. And these all lead up to the new covenant. And Jesus established the new covenant. Everything was pointing toward the new covenant. All the old covenants pointing toward the new. The entire Old Testament pointing toward the new covenant. All the prophets spoke of the new covenant. So it's just like, yeah, we're all heading toward this new covenant. So God's covenants are progressive and Christological. They're all about Christ and foreshadowing Christ. And they all culminate in the new covenant, which, like I said, Jesus established that. And he even says he's doing that on the night of the Last Supper, when that same night he established the Eucharist. The night that he got arrested later on that night, he said he was establishing the new covenant. And everybody listening to him, all his disciples, would have known what that meant because they were all Jews. They knew the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and there was a lot of talk about this new covenant that would come one day and everything that would be a part of it, which was spectacular. So tonight we're going to focus on the Mosaic covenant. I was just kind of showing you the context of where the Mosaic covenant fell, and God was communicating and had covenants with people prior to the Mosaic covenant. But then we get to this one, and this is a big deal. And of course, Moses is at the center of this. This is what's called the Mosaic covenant. The Mosaic covenant. Now, this has everything to do with a specific nation for a specific time. The Mosaic covenant is basically the nation of Israel. It's all found within the nation of Israel. It all goes together, the Mosaic covenant and the nation, the ancient nation of Israel. So God is establishing a nation, the nation of Israel, and the heart of it is that he gives that nation a body of laws. And the body of law is called the Mosaic Law, and it's very extensive. It's not just the Ten Commandments. It's pretty much everything that you find in a lot of Exodus, the second half of the book of Exodus, and Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of information that God downloaded, from the cloud, and this is divine information through Moses to the people of God, to this nation that he was forming. So he took the people of God that had descended from Abraham, and with the people of God, he was making a nation with those people. And the body of law, the whole nation was established and founded on the Mosaic Law. That's what ran everything, the Mosaic Law. Every part of life, every part of worship. There was no separation of church and state. It was all God's people, God's nation, and they obeyed God's law that he gave to them through Moses, the Mosaic Law. Now, the Mosaic covenant is powerful, and it's a deal that God makes with this group of people that are becoming his official nation upon the earth. Like I said, it's the founding documents of the nation of Israel, the Mosaic Law. The Mosaic Law is specific to the nation of Israel. Now, we can learn a lot about God's character and about important things that we need to focus on in life because it came from God, so it's good. But it was very much specific for this nation that he was founding, the nation of Israel. All right, the Mosaic Covenant. The people of Israel had been worshiping the God of Abraham before this happens. And that was fairly basic. I mean, they didn't have a lot of information. They knew that this was the God who created everything, and they would have known about the Noah event, and they knew certainly about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they knew that they were all descendants of Abraham, and God had spoken to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And so they were the people of Israel, and they were following the God of Abraham. They knew they were in that line, and that's the God that they followed. They believed there was one God, and it was the one who had revealed himself to Abraham. But it was a pretty basic deal. There wasn't a lot of laws and a lot of information at that point. And then this comes in, the Mosaic Law. Through Moses, they received something new and, like I said, extensive from God. It's a lot of information. It's a whole way of life. It addresses every part of life and every part of the function of the nation. And they didn't have that before. This Mosaic covenant. It immersed their lives, this thing. And so they had to respond to what God was saying now. So they were living as descendants of Abraham, the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people of Israel, because Jacob's name got changed to Israel. So they were the people of Israel. And they were following the basic tenets that they understood that were passed down from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and how God had revealed himself. But like I said, it was pretty basic information. And they were living according to that, right? And then this comes. God speaks again. Then at this point, this is a new covenant for them because they're kind of in the Abrahamic covenant. And now this new covenant's coming in and it's God speaking. And then they have to decide, are we going to receive this or are we going to reject it? God is speaking. Are we going to, a true believer, when God speaks, says yes, bows to it. The faithful always respond to what God is saying now. That's what they do. And the book of Hebrews starts off with that whole premise. That's what St. Paul lays out there. True faith, true belief is responding to what God has said with submission, love, loyalty, and worship. God speaks and you give yourself to what he has said and you submit to it. All right, so God forms a nation, Israel, based on this covenant. And here's the deal. Here's Israel's part of the deal. If this is going to work, Israel is to be faithful to God by being faithful to the Mosaic Law. They have to keep the covenant. The information downloaded from the cloud that Moses brings down from God, they have to know it and they have to keep it and they have to be faithful to it. That's their end of this deal in this covenant. This is the Mosaic deal, the Mosaic covenant. That's Israel's part because God has now said Mosaic law. That's what he has spoken. And his law for the nation was delivered by Moses. That's what he has now said. And to be faithful to God, you've got to respond to what he's now said. So you have to embrace this Mosaic law. And so, like I said, they're part of the deal, Israel, the people of Israel, be faithful to God by being faithful to the Mosaic law. And then God's end of the deal, he says, if you do that, that he's going to be present with them and bless them immensely, protect them, provide for them, and they are going to be very fruitful. Their crops, their families, everything, fruitfulness. And there's great descriptions in the Old Testament about what God was offering to them. And these descriptions are crazy because God says, if you guys stay faithful to the Mosaic law that I'm giving to you, he calls it the covenant, you stay faithful to the covenant, to the deal, then your enemies will not attack you. I'm going to totally protect you from that. You won't get sick. You're not going to get sick. Your crops are going to grow. You're going to have rain in the right seasons just when you need it. Your crops are going to grow. Your livestock's going to be crazy healthy. And you're going to be just completely blessed and live in peace. And it's going to be beautiful. And so he lays it out. Even more details than that. That was just a flyover. But so that's the deal. Israel's faithful to the Mosaic law, keep the covenant. Then God says, I will be present with you. I'll be in your midst, and I'm going to bless you tremendously. So it was a great deal. It was a great deal. And key, and really kind of the central part of this is the temple. At first, it's the tabernacle and the sacrificial system and the priesthood that runs that whole deal. And this is at the heart of the nation of Israel. And so you have the high priest of the Mosaic covenant and the other priests that work under him. So you got this priesthood that comes in. The high priest, and this is what I want to look at, the high priest, kind of the history of the high priest of the Mosaic covenant, the nation of Israel. You can't separate it. The nation of Israel, Mosaic covenant, it all was together. The Mosaic covenant, the laws of Moses were laws for this new nation that God had founded, this theocracy. So the high priest was responsible for all the ministries at the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a portable temple. They have this for a long time, and it moves around. They can set it up and they can take it down when they move and set it up in the new place. So, and then later they have a permanent temple in Jerusalem. But all the ministries of the tabernacle and temple are run and guided and overseen by the high priest of the nation of Israel. This was the heart of the nation, the tabernacle and temple and the worship and the sacrificial system that took place there. That was the heart of it. And that was key to them staying faithful to God and staying faithful to the Mosaic law so that they could be blessed by God. And so the high priest was a mediator. He mediated the requirements of the Mosaic law. And it was really everything had to do with sacrifice and offerings to God. So he was the go-between between God and man, the high priest of Israel. I put it this way, it helps us to understand it. He was, so to speak, the bishop of Israel. His jurisdiction was the nation of Israel, and he oversaw all the priests of Israel. And it was a very important role. And the biggest thing that he was responsible for, the high point of the year with the high priest, was the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement. That was the most sacred day of the year for the nation of Israel. And this is talked about in many places, but Leviticus 16 is where you get the heart of the information on the Day of Atonement. And on this day, and it's referred to as Yom Kippur, and on this day, the Day of Atonement, the high priest made sacrifices in offerings for himself and for the entire priesthood and for all the people, the whole nation. There were sacrifices, and he did it. He was doing all of it, the high priest. A typical day, you have the other priests that work under him doing most of the stuff, but on this day, he does it. It's a big day for the high priest. And it was the only day of the year that anyone entered the Holy of Holies, the most sacred section, the back section of the tabernacle and later in the temple. No one went in there except one time a year, and the only guy who went in there was the high priest. And he went in on the Day of Atonement, and he would sprinkle the blood of sacrifices upon the top of the Ark of the Covenant, which was referred to as the mercy seat. So yeah, go in there and sprinkle the blood on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And that's where the presence of God was. That's why it was so sacred, so holy. And there was a veil that separated the holy place in the tabernacle from the Holy of Holies. And you only went through that veil one time a year on the Day of Atonement. And the high priest did that. All right. The Mosaic law, this covenant, was possible, or I should say, it was possible only because of the sacrificial system. It was impossible to fulfill it, the Mosaic law, without the sacrificial system. Everything's based off of the sacrificial system. If you don't have a sacrificial system and a tabernacle, later temple, and an official priesthood, then you cannot keep the Mosaic law. It's impossible to keep it. That's the heart of keeping the Mosaic law. And that's important to remember. The high priest and the priests were consecrated officiants of that system. So obviously their role was super important. If the sacrificial system and the offering system is central to the nation keeping and being faithful to the Mosaic law so that they can get blessed by God, and the only ones who can officiate these things are the high priest and his priests, then obviously their role is central to everything in this nation of Israel, in this specific nation for this specific time.